Imagine a hitman taking a contract, right? And the job is to give a merchant a very specific 14-stitch knife wound across the face.
Okay, that is incredibly specific.
Well, great. So he waits in the shadows, he spots his target, but as he steps up to actually do the job, he realizes something. The merchant's face is physically too small.
Wait, too small.
Yeah. There is literally not enough real estate on this guy's face for 14 stitches.
Oh, wow.
So not wanting to, waste the trip or violate his professional contract, the hitman just slashes the merchant's servant instead, because the servant's face is sufficiently large.
Oh my God, that's terrible.
It gets better. He then walks right into his mob boss's office and argues completely straight-faced that his invoice should still be approved.
Let me guess, because hitting the servant is like the equivalent of hitting the master.
Exactly, the legal and philosophical equivalent.
It sounds like a scene ripped straight out of a modern, darkly cynical HBO comedy. It has this hyper-rationalized, almost bureaucratic absurdity to it.
It really does. But it's not modern. That scene was written over 400 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, in 16th century Spain. Welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. We are plunging headfirst into a criminal landscape that honestly defies every single expectation we have about the historical underworld.
Yeah, because you usually picture the historical underworld as a Shark Tank, right?
Exactly.
Just chaos, lawlessness, a dog-eat-dog free-for-all in dark alleys. But the world we are exploring today is run like a Fortune 500 company.
Complete with a strict human resources department.
Yes, and a monopoly on illicit services, a rigorous tax structure, and mandatory daily religious observances.
Which is wild. So our mission today is to unpack an extraordinary, often overlooked masterpiece by Miguel de Cervantes. It's called Rinconete y Cortadillo.
And everyone knows Cervantes for Don Quixote, right?
Yeah.
The windmills, the idealistic knight.
Of course. But the short story is this vivid, darkly comedic, and shockingly analytical dissection of an organized crime syndicate.
It really is a masterpiece.
And we are synthesizing a massive stack of materials for you today. We've got the complete original text, critical introductions by literary titans like Nobel laureate Vargas Llosa, and some really deep analytical commentary.
Right. Commentary on why this story essentially birthed the modern understanding of systemic corruption.
Exactly. And to truly grasp the brilliance of this text, we really have to start with the architect himself.
Cervantes.
Yeah, because Cervantes was not writing this from some comfortable ivory tower, just observing the poor from a balcony.
Definitely not. And Vargas Llosa's commentary makes it incredibly clear. Cervantes lived a life so uniquely plagued by misfortune and, just proximity to the gutter, that his own biography reads like an adventure novel.
An adventure novel written by someone who actively despised the protagonists.
Yes, exactly.
I was looking at his timeline in the sources, and misfortune doesn't even begin to cover it. The man's resilience is borderline terrifying.
It really is.
Let's just look at his 20s. He enlists in the Spanish Navy and fights in the Battle of Lepanto in 1571.
Which was huge.
Oh, massive. This isn't just a skirmish. This is one of the largest naval clashes in history, the Holy League against the Ottoman Empire. And Cervantes is down below decks, violently ill with a fever.
Right, and his captain literally tells him to stay in bed.
But he refuses. He insists on fighting, taking his position on deck, and for his bravery, he takes 2 musket balls to the chest.
Ouch.
And a third that completely shatters his left arm. He permanently loses the use of his left hand.
Which is awful. But he later proudly claimed it was a wound suffered for the greater glory of his right hand.
Which is such a writer thing to say.
It really is.
So he survives, he recovers, and a few years later, he's sailing back to Spain. He's got these letters of recommendation from high-ranking military officials.
He's expecting a hero's welcome.
Right, maybe a captaincy or solid pension. But instead, his ship is intercepted by Barbary pirates.
And those letters of recommendation actually doomed him, didn't they?
They completely doomed him. The pirates found the letters, assumed he was an incredibly wealthy, high-value nobleman, and demanded a ransom so exorbitant that his family could never, ever hope to pay it.
Wow. So he is dragged to Algiers and held as a slave for 5.5 years.
5.5 years. And he doesn't just sit there. The sources detail how he orchestrated 4 distinct, highly complex escape attempts for himself and his fellow prisoners.
That's incredible.
But every time the plot was betrayed or just fell apart at the last second. And every single time he stepped forward, took full responsibility, and fully expected to be impaled or tortured to death.
And by some miracle, or, perhaps because his captors respected his sheer audacity, he was spared execution.
Yeah. And when he was finally ransomed and returned to Spain, the empire he literally bled for had nothing to offer him.
No pension, no hero's welcome.
Nothing. He was a crippled war veteran, forced to take one of the most despised jobs available. He became a traveling tax collector and requisition agent for the Spanish Armada.
Which means he's riding around the dusty roads of Andalusia, knocking on the doors of furious peasants.
Seizing their wheat and oil to fund the king's foreign wars.
Yeah, that won't make you any friends.
Definitely not. He was actually excommunicated by the Catholic Church at one point because he had the nerve to requisition grain that belonged to the clergy.
Oh, wow. I can know that part.
Yeah. And later in life, he's thrown into the royal prison in Seville due to discrepancies in his accounting ledgers.
Which, honestly, may not have even been his fault.
Right. Considering the banks he deposited the crown's money into kept going bankrupt.
Add to that a bizarre incident where he was exiled to Italy following a duel.
Oh, right, to avoid having his remaining good hand chopped off by the authorities.
Yeah. And later, there are these societal rumors relentlessly attacking his daughter's reputation. It is just a relentless, crushing sequence of adversity.
Which brings us to this profound paradox that Vargas Llosa points out. How does a man who is literally chewed up and spat out by his own society, pursued by comical levels of bad luck, produce a story like Rinconete y Cortadillo?
That's a great question.
Right. A text that is overflowing with generosity, sharp humor, and this undeniably empathetic view of the human condition. I mean, he could have so easily written a bitter, raging manifesto.
But he doesn't. And that's the absolute genius of Cervantes. He processes his trauma through this observant, empathetic irony.
Yeah.
He looks at the absolute worst society has to offer. The cheats, the thieves, the corrupt officials, the violent thugs. And he just refuses to flatten them into caricatures.
He sees their humanity.
Exactly. He sees their humanity, their terrifying ingenuity, and the sheer comedy in their desperate attempts to survive a completely rigged system.
And to understand that rigged system, we have to set the stage for now. We are traveling to Seville in the late 16th century, around 1587, which is right when Cervantes was living there, walking those streets.
And the sources paint a picture of a city that isn't just booming. It is vibrating with a chaotic, almost aggressive level of wealth.
Yeah, Seville at this moment is the undisputed economic epicenter of the world.
Spain had established a total monopoly on trade with the Americas. The Casa de Contratación, the House of Trade, was located in Seville.
So that meant every single galleon loaded with ink and silver, gold, pearls, spices, and exotic dyes had to sail up the Guadalquivir River.
Right, and unload its cargo right into the heart of this city.
But the influx of all that New World treasure didn't create a utopia.
Yeah.
It created a nightmare.
It really did. It triggered what economic historians call the price revolution.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, because you dump that much silver and gold into a local economy, and the currency devalues. Massive inflation takes hold.
The cost of basic goods like bread, rent, clothing just skyrocketed, faster than wages ever could.
So on paper, the Spanish Empire was the richest entity on the planet.
Right.
In reality, the common people were being squeezed into desperate, grinding poverty.
It's the ultimate boomtown paradox. I think of it like 1920s Chicago or, the Wild West during the gold rush, but magnified on a global scale.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
You have the sudden, immense concentration of wealth sitting right next to widespread starvation. And whenever you have that kind of extreme disparity, you create a massive shadow economy.
Seville became a magnet for every grifter, vagabond, and ambitious criminal in the empire who wanted to siphon off the runoff of that wealth.
And Cervantes had a backstage pass to all of it. As a tax collector, he was moving fluidly between the manicured courtyards of the ultra-rich merchants and the filthy, crowded taverns where the underclass operated.
He knew the texture of it, the slang, the daily hustle of this world, intimately.
Which brings us to the opening scene of the story. It's one of the hottest days of summer. We are on the dusty road from Castile to Andalusia at an inn called the Molinillo.
Okay, setting the scene.
Two boys are seeking shade under a portico. They sit down opposite each other and begin this incredibly cautious, calculated dance. This is the meeting of our protagonists, Pedro del Rincón, who is 15, and Diego Cortado, who is 14.
And Cervantes immediately subverts the idealized romantic heroes of his era here. He gives us this meticulous, almost clinical, physical description that permanently roots these boys in the brutal reality of their poverty.
The details are incredible. They are sun-baked, their faces are unwashed, their hands are filthy, and their nails are frayed and overgrown.
Not your typical knights in shining armor.
No. One is wearing a green hunter's cap, the other wears a wide-brimmed hat missing its band. One is carrying a half-sword, the other has a yellow-handled knife tucked into his waist.
And they are draped in absolute rags.
Yes, and Cervantes focuses specifically on their feet, which I found so interesting. Cortado wears alpargatas, these cheap, rope-soled sandals that are so worn out they're practically dissolving into string. And Rincon wears heavy leather shoes that are completely missing their soles. So the leather uppers act more like heavy shackles chained around his ankles than actual footwear.
They are the visual embodiment of the picaro, the brogue. They are children, fundamentally, but their eyes are ancient. They are hardened survivors.
I love the tension of their first interaction, too. Like two stray dogs circling a scrap of meat, trying to figure out if the other is a threat, a mark, or a potential ally.
Yeah, that caution is so palpable.
And the craziest part is how they speak. They are dressed in literal garbage, but they address each other with this absurdly elevated aristocratic formality.
Right. Rincon asks something like, "Of what land is your grace, sir gentleman, and to what parts is your path directed?"
It's hilarious, but it's also a profound survival mechanism.
It really is. In the picaresque genre, language is both a weapon and a shield. By adopting the highborn language of the nobility, they are mocking the society that discarded them.
All right.
But they're also probing. They are throwing out linguistic camouflage to see if the other boy is smart enough to play along.
And once they realize they are both running the same game, the armor drops. They confess their origin stories. Rincon reveals his father was a boulero.
A man licensed by the church to sell papal bulls.
Essentially indulgences, granting the buyer absolution for their sins or a fast pass out of purgatory. Rincon basically says, look, I loved the money from the bulls way more than I cared about the bulls themselves.
A very honest grifter.
So he embezzled a bag of the church's cash, went to Madrid, lived like a king until the money ran out, got caught, suffered a public whipping, and was permanently exiled from the capital.
Quite the resume for a 15-year-old.
But his real trade, the skill he honed on the streets, is cards. He is a card mechanic. Cervantes gives us this brilliant tactile detail. Rincon carries a deck of cards that he describes as ovada, oval-shaped.
Right. He has shaved and rounded the edges of specific cards.
So meticulously that purely by touch, he can manipulate the deck to ensure he always wins at 21.
Which is the 16th century equivalent of blackjack.
A 15-year-old math savant card sharp. And then Cortado pitches his resume. He's the son of a tailor. But he didn't want to spend his life hunched over a table sewing doublets.
So what does he do?
He took his father's precise scissor skills and applied them to cutting the strings of coin purses in crowded markets. He is a master pickpocket.
Amazing.
He had to flee his hometown of Toledo because a spy tipped off the local magistrate about his incredibly nimble fingers.
So they look at each other, and there's this beautiful immediate recognition. They are kindred spirits. They literally embrace cementing this brotherhood of necessity right there on the porch of the inn.
And they agree to form a joint venture.
And they do not waste a single second.
No, they don't. A muleteer, a guy who drives pack animals for a living, walks up to get some shade. Rincon pulls out a shaved deck, they invite the guy to play a friendly game, and in less than half an hour, these two children have scammed a working adult out of 12 reilers and 22 maravedis.
And to put that currency into perspective for you, a common laborer at that time might earn a single real, or maybe a real and a half, for a brutal day of physical work.
So 12 real is a lot.
It is a significant sum. It's easily a week's wages, possibly more, stolen in 30 minutes of card playing.
Naturally, the muleteer realizes he's been hustled. He gets angry, he stands up, and he tries to physically take his money back from these two ragged kids.
And this is where the tone of the story shifts, instantly, from playful trickster comedy to something much darker and more dangerous.
Because the boys do not flinch.
They don't cower, they don't run.
One draws his half-sword, the other whips out that yellow-handled knife, and they stand their ground, fully prepared to gut this grown man over a pile of coins.
That's a chilling image.
Cervantes writes explicitly that the muleteer would have fared very badly if some travelers on horseback hadn't ridden up at that exact moment and intervened, breaking up the fight.
It forces the reader to confront the reality of their situation. Yes, they are young, and yes, they are witty, but they exist entirely outside the social contract. Right. They have internalized the lesson that violence is a perfectly acceptable even necessary tool to protect their illicit capital.
And they end up hitching a ride to Seville with those same travelers, acting as helpful little servants along the way.
But the second they reach the city gates,
Specifically the customs gate, where the travelers are distracted paying entry taxes on their goods, Cortado casually slips his knife out, slashes open the bag of a Frenchman traveling with their group, and steals 2 shirts, a sundial, and a notebook.
and they immediately vanish into the city,
Yep, and fence the stolen goods at a flea market for another 20 reales.
which is incredibly cold-blooded. They view everyone, even the people who just provided them with safe passage and protection, as nothing more than marks. There's no honor among thieves at this stage of the story.
I have to pause here because this dynamic is fascinating. They are scamming working-class muleteers. They are stealing from the people who help them. As we read this, is Cervantes condemning them?
It's a fair question.
Because it feels gritty, almost uncomfortably real for a piece of classic literature. How's the audience supposed to feel about these two?
Well, that is the central tension of the entire picaresque genre. To understand it, you have to look at what people were reading right before this.
Chivalric romances, right?
Exactly. The literary market was flooded with them. Knights in shining armor, pristine moral codes, princesses, dragons. The picaresque emerged as a violent, gritty, hyper-realistic counter-movement.
So the Picaro is the ultimate anti-hero.
Exactly. Cervantes isn't asking you to endorse their morality, but he is demanding that you acknowledge their context. Society has completely abandoned them. The social safety net does not exist.
So they feel they owe society nothing.
Precisely. The reason we root for them is that their wit, their audacity, and their sharp edges are the only weapons they have against a world that is completely indifferent to whether they starve in a ditch or not.
It's a pure meritocracy of survival. So, flush with cash from the muleteer and the fenced shirts, our boys decide they need a cover story if they are going to operate in the booming metropolis of Seville.
Right. They need to blend in.
So they watch the local street kids and decide to buy small sacks and palm baskets, setting themselves up as esportieros basket boys or porters.
And it is the perfect strategic cover. Seville is driven entirely by commerce. Merchants, nobles, and citizens constantly need goods transported from the riverfront markets to their homes.
So a basket boy is basically part of the urban furniture.
They are invisible. This job gives them unquestioned, legitimate access to every corner of the city, including the inner courtyards of incredibly wealthy estates, without raising a single red flag.
They set up shop in the plaza of San Salvador, and almost immediately, a student who is also training as a sacristan in the church hires Cortado to carry some provisions.
And Cortado goes to work.
With those magical tailor fingers. While carrying the goods, he manages to seamlessly lift the student's purse. And this isn't just a few reales. The purse contains 15 gold escudos and 2 reales.
An escudo is a gold coin. 15 of them is an astronomical haul for a street thief.
It's huge.
It represents months, perhaps a year or more, of comfortable living.
It's a massive score. But the student realizes it's missing. He comes sprinting back to the plaza, hyperventilating, sweating through his robes, absolutely panicked about his lost gold.
And here is where Cortado elevates himself from a simple pickpocket to a master manipulator.
He doesn't play dumb or runaway. He plays a helpful, highly philosophical bystander. He uses a psychological technique that Cervantes refers to as Bernardinus.
This is a brilliant linguistic trick.
Sure.
A Bernardina is a barrage of confusing, nonsensical, overly complex vocabulary meant to completely overload the listener's cognitive processing.
It's a neurolinguistic hack. Cortado starts comforting the student, telling him to have patience, but he weaves in all this religious jargon, talking about the grace of God, excommunication, sacrilege, saying things like, where they give them, they take them.
He speaks so fast and with such authority that the student's brain just blues greens.
Modern con artists still use this exact technique, don't they?
They absolutely do. It's called cognitive overload. When someone is already in a state of panic, their amygdala is firing, their heart rate is up. If you flood them with complex, authoritative-sounding information, their critical thinking shuts down entirely.
The student is so mesmerized by this rapid-fire empathy that he just stands there frozen.
And while he's standing there frozen and weeping,
The student pulls out a beautiful lace handkerchief to wipe the sweat off his face. And Cortado, while actively looking the student in the eye and comforting him about the stolen purse, steals the lace handkerchief right out of his hand.
it's audacious to the point of performance art.
It really is. It proves that for Cortado, theft has transcended mere survival. It is his craft, It is an intellectual exercise to see exactly how much reality he can bend around his mark.
But the boys are about to get a massive reality check of their own.
Oh yeah. A local street kid named Ganchuelo has been watching this entire performance from the shadows. He walks up to them, speaks to them in Germania, the secret slang of the Spanish underworld, and asks if they are murcios, thieves.
And when they cautiously agree, Ganchuelo drops a bombshell.
He asks if they have registered their arrival at the aduana, the customs house of Señor Monipodio.
The boys are completely bewildered. Cortado looks at him and says, "Wait, I thought that stealing was a free trade, and that if you pay taxes, it's paid in bulk, giving your neck and back to the executioner as guarantors."
It's the perfect historical parallel to modern gig economy platforms.
It really is.
Rincón and Cortado rolled into Seville thinking they were independent contractors. They thought they had found a paradise of unregulated free market enterprise where they kept 100% of their profits.
Instead, they just discovered that a monopoly controls the entire city, and there's a CEO taking a mandatory 30% cut of every transaction.
Ganchuelo has to explain the system to them using entirely institutional, bureaucratic language. He tells them that all thieves, without exception, must register with the syndicate.
They must pay their dues to the crime boss, Monipodio, and they must obey a strict set of institutional bylaws.
If they operate outside the syndicate, they won't just face the police. They will be hunted down and severely punished by the cartel itself.
What Cervantes is doing here is just lethal satire. He is holding a mirror up to the bloated, obsessed with paperwork Spanish government of the 16th century.
And showing that the criminal underworld isn't a rebellion against that society, it's a perfect, functioning replica of it.
The criminals aren't fighting the system, they just built their own IRS.
And Ganchuelo pitches it to them like an insurance policy. He boasts that under Monopodio's leadership, it is incredibly rare for a registered thief to end up whipped or sentenced to row in the galleys.
Right, because Monipodio provides legal defense, he bribes the scribes and magistrates, and he provides a safe, structured market for fencing stolen goods.
It is organized crime in its most literal corporate sense.
So, Ganchuelo leads them through the winding streets to the syndicate's headquarters, and the courtyard of this dilapidated house serves as the waiting room.
Cervantes paints a scene here that is a masterpiece of the grotesque. Describe this waiting room, because it's not what you'd expect a mob hideout to law like.
Not at all. It looks exactly like the waiting room at a municipal DMV, but populated by felons. As the boys wait, a complete cross-section of Seville's underbelly files in to punch the clock. You have two young men dressed cleanly as university students. You have a blind man.
You have two highly respectable-looking elderly gentlemen wearing expensive baize cloaks and carrying massive, heavy rosaries.
And then you have the muscle. Two heavily armed thugs, or bravos. They're sporting enormous ballooning trousers, wide collars, and instead of carrying the standard daggers of the era, they have heavy flintlock pistols tucked into their belts.
It is a terrifying mix of the sacred, the scholarly, and the hyper-violent.
And then the CEO makes his entrance. Señor Monipodio descends the stairs into the courtyard.
He is a nightmare given form. He's about 45 years old, toweringly tall, with a dark complexion. He has a thick unibrow that stretches unbroken across his forehead.
Cervantes describes his chest as being so incredibly hairy that it looks like a literal forest peeking through the lacing of his shirt.
He's wearing a rough cloak, and his feet are wide, deformed, and massive, clad in these oversized shoes. He looks like a primitive beast.
But watch how he behaves. The physical description screams savage monster, but his demeanor is entirely middle management.
He enters the courtyard, raises his arms to heaven, and offers a solemn, almost religious benediction. Blessed be all the friends and brothers of this confraternity.
He demands complete silence and deep reverence from the assembled thugs and thieves. The juxtaposition is brilliant.
It really is. He sits down to conduct their HR onboarding interview.
Like a hiring manager.
Exactly. He asks about their skills, their backgrounds, but when he asks for their hometowns and parents' names, he tells them they don't actually need to provide real information.
Why is that?
Because, he says, it doesn't sound good when the court scribe writes down, the son of so-and-so was hanged. He's highly pragmatic about the paperwork implications of a death sentence.
Very pragmatic. And he is so thoroughly impressed by the boys' bravado, their street smarts, and Cortado's recounting of the sacristan purse theft that he makes an executive decision.
He officially waives their novitiate year.
Their probationary training period, and really integrates them into the syndicate, giving them their new corporate titles, Rinconete and Cortadillo.
But the onboarding is abruptly interrupted by a major crisis. There is a frantic knocking at the door. A corrupt constable in Alguacil has arrived in an absolute panic.
Oh, why?
He's demanding the return of a very specific stolen item, a blue velvet purse with gold tassels containing 15 gold escudos belonging to a sacristan.
Which is, of course, the exact purse Cortadillo just lifted in the plaza.
Exactly. And Monipodio flies into a terrifying rage. But what's crucial here is why he is angry. He is not angry that a crime was committed.
No, he is furious that an unauthorized crime was committed by independent contractors operating outside his jurisdiction, thereby threatening his delicate political arrangement with the authorities.
Monipodio has a symbiotic relationship with this constable. The constable looks the other way, provides cover, and warns the syndicate of raids.
Right.
In exchange, the syndicate ensures that certain high-profile thefts are returned to make the police look competent, and they pay heavy bribes.
Monipodio screams at the courtyard that whoever took the purse must surrender it immediately, or he will personally execute them to appease the constable.
The tension in the room is incredible. Cortadillo has the purse tucked in his shirt. If he stays quiet, he keeps a fortune. If he speaks up, he might be killed.
But Rinconete shows immense emotional intelligence here. He calculates the variables and realizes that 15 gold escudos are not worth the death sentence.
And more importantly, they are not worth burning this incredibly valuable networking connection they just made with the most powerful man in the underworld.
He leans over and convinces Cortadillo to hand it over.
Rinconete presents the purse to Monipodio with absolute diplomatic grace. He explains they took it before they understood the rules of the aduana, but they gladly surrender it to serve the greater good of the confraternity.
Monipodio is so deeply relieved that he doesn't have to kill anyone or go to war with the police that he instantly dubs Cortadillo El Bueno the Good.
Look at this through a modern corporate lens. Monipodio is a master of risk management and public relations.
He turns to his followers and explicitly frames handing over the gold as a necessary business expense.
He says, "It is not much that to him who gives you a whole hand, you give a leg of it."
He knows that the syndicate's long-term survival depends entirely on keeping the corrupt authorities placated. The police need the criminals to generate revenue through bribes, and the criminals need the police to maintain their monopoly.
It is the ultimate cost of doing business. Which brings us to perhaps the most mind-bending thematic layer of this entire deep dive. Holy water and stolen goods. The paradox of pious thieves.
This is where Cervantes' diagnostic X-ray of society cuts the deepest. He is dissecting the cultural and spiritual fabric of 16th century Spain.
When Rinconete first sneaks a peek into the inner rooms of Monipodio's house, he takes note of the decor. He sees fencing swords and buckler shields hanging on the wall, the tools of violence.
But right beneath the weapons, there is a small altar featuring an image of the Virgin Mary, complete with an alms box for donations and a small basin of holy water.
And every single hardened, blood-soaked criminal who walks into that house stops, dips their fingers in the holy water, performs a deep, devout bow, and kisses the floor in front of the altar.
Earlier, Gantuelo had proudly explained the rules of their holy crime to the boys. A mandatory portion of every single theft goes into that alms box.
The money is used to buy oil for a miraculous lamp maintained in the city.
And these thugs genuinely, fervently believe that funding this holy lamp guarantees them divine protection from the executioner's torture rack. They actually sit around having theological debates about it.
They also maintain strict religious observances. They refuse to steal on Fridays out of respect, and they absolutely will not associate with any prostitute or woman named Mary on Saturdays.
It's just wild.
Okay, I have to stop and ask the question that I know I was thinking when I read this, and it's what you must be wondering too. Is Cervantes just taking cheap shots here?
Like, is he just mocking them?
Yeah. Is he just poking fun at religion and calling these people massive hypocrites? Or is there a deeper psychological mechanism he's exposing?
It is definitely not a cheap shot.
Yeah.
It is a profound, chilling observation of the human capacity for compartmentalization.
How so?
Well, you have to contextualize this within Counter-Reformation Spain. The Inquisition is active. Public displays of Catholic devotion are not just expected. They are a matter of life and death.
Right.
The criminals aren't necessarily faking their faith to look good for the neighbors. They have internalized the culture's rituals, but they have seamlessly woven their illicit, violent lives into that religious framework.
They treat God not as a supreme moral judge of right and wrong, but as a corruptible, high-level magistrate.
No different from the constable they just bribed with the velvet purse.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly dark. They view God as a business partner who can be paid off. Here's your 10% cut of the purse I just stole, Lord. Please ensure the magistrate doesn't find the body.
Exactly. They believe that ritual observance, lighting a candle, fasting on a Friday, reciting a rosary, acts as a supernatural ledger that mathematically cancels out the moral weight of their violence and theft.
It is a completely transactional view of salvation.
And no one in the story embodies this terrifying cognitive dissonance better than the character of Old Papoda.
Oh, Old Papoda. She arrives at the house dragging a massive heavy basket of stolen laundry that 2 thugs ripped off from a wealthy home.
But she refuses to even open the basket to appraise the loot. She is in a frantic, breathless rush to leave.
Why? Because she has to get to the church to light devotional candles to the saints San Miguel, San Blas, Santa Lucia.
And here's the crowning moment of absurdity. She gets to the door and realizes she forgot her purse. So she turns to the prostitutes in the room and begs them for some coins to buy the holy candles.
And the prostitutes hand her money earned through illicit means to buy the candles.
And Old Papoda promises to pray for the entire syndicate so that God will protect them from the justice system while they go out and commit more crimes.
She literally prays, "May he free and preserve us in our dangerous trade without sudden fights from justice. Amen."
It is staggering.
Yeah.
They are praying for supernatural assistance in successfully executing their sins.
And Cervantes captures it without a single ounce of heavy-handed preaching. He doesn't insert a narrator to scold them.
He just presents it in all its vivid, hypocritical glory, forcing the reader to observe how easily human beings can twist and contort the concept of morality to serve their own immediate self-interest.
The psychological gymnastics are Olympic level. Once Old Papoda scurries off to light her stolen money candles, the syndicate settles in for a banquet.
They pull an old stained sheet out, lay it on a straw mat right in the middle of the courtyard, and feast.
Fried cod, cheese, olives, radishes, and wine they pass around in a massive leather boot.
It functions as a grotesque parody of the Last Supper. It's a communion of the corrupt breaking bread to solidify their twisted brotherhood.
But the banquet is derailed by an eruption of domestic drama. A young woman bursts through the door. Her name is Carrie Harda, and she is a prostitute working within the syndicate's protection.
She is weeping hysterically, her face is bruised, and she is screaming for justice.
She reveals she has just been brutally beaten by her pimp and lover, a thug named Repolito. And the reason for the beating is devastatingly petty. He had asked her for 30 reales. She had worked grueling hours and only managed to earn 24. Because she shorted him 6 reales, he dragged her into an olive grove outside the city and whipped her mercilessly with his belt.
It's a sharp, brutal reality check that cuts right through the comedic tone of the story. Up to this point, the violence has been mostly theoretical or comedic.
Here, Cervantes shows us the very real systemic violence against women that underpins this underworld.
But the psychological twist that follows is what really stays with you. As the other women in the syndicate gather around to comfort Carriarda and curse Repolito's name, they ask her a very specific question.
They ask if, after beating her, Repolito showed her any affection.
And Carriarda stops crying for a second and admits, yes, afterward he made 100,000 caresses and almost cried himself. And suddenly, her entire demeanor flips.
She starts defending him.
When Repolito actually shows up at the door looking for her, she hides behind Monipodio, screams at him, calls him monster.
Yeah.
But within 2 minutes of him apologizing, they are completely reconciled and embracing. Cervantes uses this rapid, jarring cycle to demonstrate the deeply toxic, inescapable nature of their world. There is no escape from the abuse, because the abuse has been completely normalized by everyone around them.
Even Monipodio steps in to act as a twisted couples counselor, insisting that fights between those who love each other well are the cause of greater pleasure when peace is made.
It is a horrific rationalization, but it serves the syndicate's purpose. It restores order so the machine can keep running.
To celebrate this deeply messed up reconciliation, the group decides they need music. They form a makeshift band right there in the courtyard.
And the sensory details Cervantes provides here are just incredible.
One woman takes off her hard-soled slipper and uses it as a drum. Another grabs a brand new palm broom and scrapes her fingers across the stiff bristles to keep rhythm.
Monipodio himself grabs a ceramic plate, smashes it in half, and uses the 2 broken shards like castanets, clacking them together.
It is a scene of raw, unpolished, chaotic vitality. They are literally making music out of garbage and broken things.
It highlights the undeniable resilience and ingenuity of the underclass. They are capable of creating moments of genuine joy out of the absolute detritus of society.
The party is in full swing, but business never stops. A client arrives at the door. It's a wealthy, well-dressed young gentleman, and he is furious.
He's here to complain to Monipodio about a hit he ordered.
He had contracted one of the syndicate's thugs, a guy named Chiquisnaque, to give a rival merchant a 14-stitch knife slashed to the face.
Notice how hyper-specific the request is. Not just a beating, exactly 14 stitches worth of damage.
Exactly. But Chiquisnaque, who is standing right there, admits to the boss that he didn't actually slash the merchant. He slashed the merchant's servant instead.
And his excuse for botching the hit is absolute dark comedy gold.
Chiquisnaque explains that he waited in the shadows, he spotted the merchant, but as he stepped out with his knife, he realized that the merchant's face was simply too small.
He argues that it was physically impossible to fit a 14-stitch cut on such a tiny face without killing the man, which wasn't part of the contract.
So, not wanting to waste his time or the walk, he found the merchant's servant who had a nice wide face and slashed him instead.
And he demands full payment from the client anyway. His legal argument is that he who loves the master loves the dog, implying that inflicting pain on the servant is the philosophical and contractual equivalent of inflicting pain on the master.
And Monipodio, acting as the Supreme Court Justice of the underworld, agrees with the hitman.
He tells the frustrated client that the contract was fulfilled to the best of their physical ability, and he has to pay up.
The client's annoyed, but ultimately accepts the ruling, pays the fee, and even puts down a deposit for a future, properly sized hit on the merchant.
But what happens next is the most chilling part of the entire deep dive.
To make sure the transaction is properly recorded, Monipodio pulls out his actual corporate ledger, a physical bound book. He can't read very well, so he hands it to our boy Rinconete to read the accounts aloud.
This is the moment the bureaucratic satire reaches its absolute zenith.
Rinconete opens the book and reads the entries. It is an itemized, alphabetized list of paid violence. There are headings, memory of slashings to be given this week, memory of heavy beatings.
Memorial of common grievances, which includes petty harassment, like nailing animal horns to a rival's door to imply their wife is cheating, organizing mockings and staging fake riots to ruin a business's reputation.
If we extrapolate the implications of this ledger, it is deeply horrifying. Violence in this world has been entirely stripped of passion, anger, or heat.
It has been sterilized and reduced to administrative line items, complete with installment payments, due dates, and assigned executors.
At one point, Monipodio even gets annoyed that one of his thugs is late on delivering a scheduled beating. But when someone mentions the thug is out sick, Monipodio immediately softens and says, okay, he's a good worker, he must really be sick, let's extend his deadline.
It is so bizarrely professional. It poses a chilling question for you, the listener. When crime becomes this banal, this heavily bureaucratic, this inextricably woven into the everyday commerce and accounting of a city, how does a society ever root it out?
You can send the army to fight a chaotic gang of wild thugs in an alley, but how do you fight a syndicate that has a more efficient accounting department than the city council?
The philosopher Hannah Arendt famously coined the phrase the banality of evil in the 20th century to describe the terrifyingly bureaucratic nature of the Holocaust and modern atrocities. The idea that evil isn't always a screaming monster, sometimes it's just a clerk stamping paperwork.
And Cervantes is showing us the banality of crime in the 16th century. For these people, slashing a face or stealing a purse is just a job. It's just numbers moving from one column in a ledger to another.
Which brings us to the conclusion of our story. After seeing all of this, the hypocritical piety, the toxic relationships wrapped in romance, the hyper-rationalized violence recorded in a ledger, we get to witness Rinconete's internal epiphany.
The perspective shifts inward here. Rinconete is highly intelligent. We know this. But despite being a thief himself, a kid who alters playing cards to rob working men, he is deeply, profoundly disturbed by what he has witnessed inside Monipodio's house.
He's experiencing a moral limit. It's fascinating because he isn't having a religious awakening. He's having an intellectual and ethical revulsion.
He is shocked by the absolute brazen security in which these criminals operate right under the nose of the law.
He is astounded by their theological delusion, the fact that they genuinely believe they can go straight to heaven while actively sinning just because they put a stolen coin in a box for some candle oil.
And on a purely intellectual, snobbish level, he is offended by the sheer absurdity of Monipodio's vocabulary. He notes how the mob boss constantly mangles big words to sound educated.
Like repeatedly saying naufragio, which means shipwreck, when he actually means suffragio, meaning suffrage or a prayer for the dead.
Rinconete looks around the courtyard and realizes with crystal clarity that he is surrounded by violent, delusional fools who are trapped in a machine of their own making. He resolves, in that moment, that he and Cortadillo must eventually leave this wicked, lost life.
He sees the Matrix for what it is.
He has a moment of pure clarity. He knows exactly what the right thing to do is, but
the decision isn't immediate. The text tells us that, swayed by their youth, their inexperience, and the undeniable comfort of having a roof over their heads and protection from the police, Rinconete and Cortadillo end up staying inside the mafia for several more months.
The sheer convenience of the corrupt system overrides his moral revulsion.
And then, the story just stops. The sources highlight this as one of the most fascinating aspects of the text. Cervantes leaves their ultimate fate a complete mystery.
He promises at the very end of the manuscript to tell the rest of their story, their life and miracles, in another book at another time, but he never actually wrote a sequel.
I want to dig into that. Why do you think that open ending works so well? Because as a reader or a listener, we're conditioned to want closure. We want a climax.
Right. We want to see the boys escape in the dead of night, or get arrested by a heroic magistrate, or take over the syndicate in bloody coup.
The open ending is brilliant precisely because it mirrors the reality of systemic corruption. Bureaucracies don't have neat narrative arcs. They don't have fiery third-act climaxes. They just endure.
The system Monipodio built isn't going to collapse in a shootout. It's just going to wake up tomorrow, process more ledgers, collect more taxes, and bribe more constables.
By leaving the boys inside the syndicate, choosing comfort over morality, Cervantes leaves you with a lingering, deeply uncomfortable question.
Which is, are these organized systems of corruption, these bizarre moral compromises, just quaint relics of 16th century Spain? Or do they constantly adapt, mutate, and survive in every single society throughout human history?
Exactly. It forces you to look at the modern world differently. The human tendency to rationalize our own corruption, to build massive corporate or political structures that protect our self-interest, to use the language of morality or religion, to cover up illicit acts that is entirely timeless.
Cervantes captured the DNA of that behavior 400 years ago, and it rings just as true in the 21st century.
The Monipodios of the world are still out there. They're just wearing tailored suits and running offshore shell companies instead of wearing baize cloaks in the Seville courtyard.
So what does this all mean for us? Think about the organizations, the institutions, or even the social circles you navigate every single day. How many of them operate with their own unspoken ledgers?
Their own absurd, hypocritical rituals.
Their own massive blind spots where people manage to convince themselves they are doing good, or at least doing nothing wrong, while actively participating in a system that is deeply flawed or exploitative.
Cervantes showed us, with a wink and a wry smile, that the line between a respectable civil society and a corrupt criminal underworld isn't a massive stone wall.
Sometimes it's just a matter of who happens to be keeping the books.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. When you X-ray society, it doesn't show a clean binary break between good and evil. It just shows a vast, complex, enduring bureaucracy of human nature.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the bustling, dangerous streets of Golden Age Seville. We hope you walk out into the world tomorrow with the same sharp, observant, and maybe slightly cynical eyes as Rinconete and Cortadillo. Is there a hidden ledger operating in your world? That's something for you to mull over.